This is Susan Howlett. Welcome to Creating a Culture of Philanthropy for seasoned fundraising professionals in Boys and Girls Clubs. I'm giving you a gold star for taking time to invest in your own professional development today, because it's hard to kind of carve out time for yourself, but I'm really glad you did. Heather is going to give us some logistics about how to handle this webinar today. Heather?
Hello, everyone. Basically what's going to happen is while she's presenting throughout the presentation, there's going to be some questions that she will ask, and you can utilize the question box to answer those questions that Susan asked throughout her presentation. And there will also be a couple of polls that we'll do, and so those will pull up directly on your screen, and you'll be able to click your choices on the screen. If you have any technical difficulties, please use the chat box, and I will assist you the best way that I can. Thank you, Susan.
All right, great. I also want to thank you for all the gifts that you bring to your club, because I know that kids and families in your community are thriving more because of your work. Probably some child is spending this afternoon in the care of trained adults who know how to engage her in worthwhile activities just because of the work you do. Before I dive into the content, I wanted to acknowledge who's with us today. We've got a lot of people who have been in the field for a long time, some who have not, and they're just learning about how to create a culture of philanthropy. We've got people from the East Coast, the West Coast, and the central part of the country. So good mix of people, and I'm glad that you're with us. I've got about an hour's worth of content, including some questions, and I really want you to weigh in when it's time, because I want to make sure that what we're talking about is relevant to you today. So we'll have some polls and some questions, and I hope you'll participate. And then once I get through my content, we'll take questions at the end as well. We'll take them in the middle, but also at the end. So I've noticed that I've been doing this stuff for 40 years, and I've noticed that there's a heavy load that lands on development staff who are usually unacknowledged. Well, we have to be cheerleaders in the organization and be the rah-rah people, but we're also often the ones who are asking, the only people who are asking hard questions. Like sometimes I feel like if it wasn't for us, nobody else would be saying, what are our outcomes? And are we taking good care of our relationships with our partner organizations? And are we using the most compelling language in our stakeholders? Or are we engaging our board members in authentic leadership so they'll want to give more and serve as powerful ambassadors and be effective fundraisers and so on? It's hard asking these essential questions all the time and being cheerful and kind and attentive and strategic all at the same time. And then I'm sure you've gone to conferences like I have and found out that now we're responsible for creating a culture of philanthropy that affects the whole organization. Yikes, makes me tired. So in today's webinar, we're going to discuss how to create that culture of philanthropy, and more than that, how to engage others in helping create it so we're not trying to do all the heavy lifting alone. I'm going to ask you to participate several times during this conversation, and here's our first question for you, our first poll. I imagine that if you've been in the field for a while, you've heard about the UnderDeveloped report that was done in California through the Compass Point and the Haas Foundation. So I'm going to ask you to weigh in if you've been part of this, if you're familiar with UnderDeveloped or not. So the poll question is on the right-hand side of your screen. Let us know if you've heard of UnderDeveloped. Heather, what are we finding out?
It looks like most people are not familiar with the study.
All right. So I'll give you the Cliff Notes. How about that? This study actually explored the churn in the development profession, because the statistics were showing that all over the country there were very few people who were sticking with development jobs for very long. And the poll results, or the results of the study, found out two major findings. One was that nonprofits are hiring really inexperienced people who don't understand what the research is, they don't have deep experience, they haven't worked under mentors and so on, and so they can't thrive in development, and then they leave or get fired. Or the other alternative was that nonprofits are hiring seasoned people who then couldn't actually do what they knew how to do because they were operating in a climate that wasn't helpful, that was sort of almost hostile to development. I see this all the time when I teach at the University of Washington, and every year I churn out 35 highly trained people who are excellent at fundraising, and they land in organizations where no one wants to support them, and they think that everyone thinks that they're just supposed to like fix it and go raise all the money by themselves. Development can't raise the money that they expect from us if the rest of the people aren't helping us foster a culture that's really an environment that's helpful. So one of the fundamental concepts in this report is that a culture of philanthropy means that everyone in the organization thinks that they have a role to play. It doesn't just belong to development. So if you haven't read the report, I've included a link at the end, and I really suggest that you read it, even if you just read the executive summary. And then I encourage you to share it, marked up and highlighted and everything else with your superiors, and insist that your organization have a conversation about it, because we cannot raise the money we're supposed to raise if we don't have other people helping us. Meanwhile, the rest of this webinar is going to focus on practical things that you can do and get other people to do to engender an environment that is conducive to generosity and loyalty. I also want to ask this morning how many of you have heard of Penelope Burk, or seen her, or heard her, or read her book, Donor Centered Fundraising. So you can answer that poll question if you'd like. And Heather, what are we seeing? Have people heard of Penelope Burk?
It looks like majority have not, but there's about 35% who have.
All right, thanks. So just to recap, well, I'm going to go back there. Penelope Burk is a Canadian fundraiser and researcher who interviewed tens of thousands of organizations across 3 countries and found out some really interesting stuff. One of the things that she found was that donors said that they would give our organizations much larger gifts more times per year and over the course of more years if they got 3 things from us that they are longing for but not getting. So that means they would give us higher gift amounts more often and longer, which is the definition of sustainable fundraising, but they're not getting the things that they want to make them stay. So they said they would give us larger gifts more times per year and more over more years if they got 3 things that they are really wishing that they got from us. And it's interesting to see what these things are. The first one was that they wanted prompt, personal, meaningful thank yous. And what they meant was, what are they getting instead? They're often either getting no thank you at all, or they're getting form letters that have predictable language on them, and people aren't enjoying the thank yous that they're getting. The second thing that they said was that they wanted assurance that their gift was spent as directed. So if the appeal or the event commentary or whatever said that it was going to go to X, they want to know that that's where it actually got spent. And if they asked for it to be spent in a particular way, they want that to happen as well. So they just wanted assurance. Thankfully, the research said that it's okay to give them that assurance in the thank you. But the third thing that they said that they wanted and don't get is 6 or 9 months down the road, after the money has been banked and spent, they want to know whose life did it touch and how did it touch that life and how did anything change. So what they called it in the research was proof of impact, that their gift had actually landed somewhere and made a difference. So we're going to cover how to deliver those things, the things that people are looking for. But I have to tell you, it struck me when I first heard these findings for the first time that they were almost identical to something that I had learned over 40 years ago at my very first fundraising workshop, which was with a woman named Flo Green, who just died recently. She used to run the California Association of Nonprofits. And she said at the very first workshop I ever went to on fundraising that there are 3 things that motivate giving, whether that is money or in-kind or time. The first one is that people want to feel appreciated. They want to feel seen. They want to feel known. They want to feel valued by the organization. They want to know that they are in relationship with us and we see them. The second thing is that people wanted to know that whatever they're doing on our behalf is actually moving the dial in some way, that something is changing because of their support of us. And the third thing that motivates giving is that people, even in a highly connected electronic world, they're longing for a sense of belonging or connection to something that is bigger than themselves. So I realized when I heard the Penelope Burk research that it's almost exactly the same things 40 years later. She's done this new research and it's pointing to the same things that people want. So I believe that when we focus on delivering these things to our key stakeholders, whether they're board, staff, volunteers, donors, whatever, that we are fostering the kind of organization that people want to be a part of. And if they're feeling cared for and they see the impact of their work, they're going to stick around and they're going to give us more money and they're going to invite other people to join them. So in today's webinar, I want to explore with you how we can lean into these concepts to create the kind of environment that is going to help us raise more money. And with each topic that I cover today, I'm going to share what I think the problem is. I'm going to offer a solution to that. I'm going to give you some concrete examples of how that has looked in other organizations, and then give you a chance, give you some time to apply it to your own organization and see what might work there. And because I know what your job already looks like, I'm going to promise that these suggestions don't cost any money and they don't take very much time, because I know you're already over your limit in terms of how much you have to do. And finally, at the end of this conversation, we're going to discuss how to get other stakeholders to help implement these concepts. And I'm going to list 4 problems today, and we'll talk about how to resolve each one of them. Are you ready? So the first one is that donors don't feel seen or known or valued or important to us. I don't know how old you are, but you might remember a TV show called Cheers. And one of the things that Cheers was about is being known. What happened when somebody walked into Cheers? Somebody knew their name, someone knew what they wanted to drink, someone knew where they wanted to sit. And I think that people are longing to have that. I think that's why that TV show was so successful for so long, because it captured this deep longing that people have to feel like they're part of something. And our organizations aren't helping our donors feel like that. According to Penelope Burk's research, they feel like they leaned in, they raised their hand, they said, count me in, I want to be part of this. And we've essentially flicked them off. We've abandoned them, we've betrayed them. They said that if they do get a thank you, it's perfunctory, it's on letterhead, it's predictable language. And sometimes our thank yous are more about a transaction than a deep relationship. And we're not encouraging a culture of philanthropy by being transactional. They even said that lots of times our thank yous are more about us than they are about them. So donors aren't feeling appreciated or seen or known or valued by us. The solution to this is what we really need to be doing is making the donor the hero, not us. We need to be affirming their values and their connection to our work. I was leading a focus group several years ago that was, everybody in the focus group was a donor of $25,000 or more to this one client of mine. And it was a really robust conversation, and in the middle of it, this one woman stopped and she said, Susan, what nonprofits fail to understand when they ask me for money is that I am not making a gift to the organization. When I make a gift, it is a manifestation of my values in the world. I'm making the gift to me, to my family, to my community, to the things I value, through your organization, not to it. And it kind of rocked my planet when she said that, because I realized that we have spent our careers in fundraising talking about thanking the people who give us money for giving to us so that we can do what we want to do. And what we really need to be doing is focusing our appreciation and our thank yous on them and what they think is important, not what we think is important. So don't thank them for giving to us. Thank them for believing in what we believe in, for sharing our values, for investing in the children that we serve, not us. So I think we need to lavish more love and attention on our donors and help them feel seen and known and appreciated. In fact, just yesterday I saw a post by another giant in our field named Andrea Kilstead, and she said that thank yous need to be authentic and genuine and timely. So I'm going to share some suggestions about how to do more of this with our internal stakeholders, especially our staff and our board. So I'm going to start with 4 things that I want us to be doing for the staff, because I think if we're not modeling this behavior, they're not going to see what it feels like or looks like, and they're not going to, so they won't know how to do it with other people. So I'm starting with 4 things that I want you to do for the staff so they can experience this. The first one is connect the dots between them and what they're paying for. So a colleague of mine who used to work in a child-serving organization, every time he got a big check from somebody, he would Xerox it and post it on the bulletin board in the staff break room so that everybody could see it. And he would circle the number on the check and then write in big bold marker, this gift came in to support the work that you do. And it kind of helped people connect the dots between fundraising and their work as program staff so that they realized that there really was a connection, that people were funding their work, not the organization. So that's one thing we can do, is help the staff see the relationship between the gifts that come in and their work. The second one is, and maybe you do this already, to start every meeting with shout outs. Catch people doing something good and make sure that people get called out for very specific things that they're doing on behalf of the organization at the staff meetings, because they want to feel seen and known and valued too. The third one is, you might see if there's anybody influential that you have access to in your organization that the staff might like to meet. Because I know oftentimes we bring celebrities to our events, or we have influential people on our board or among advisory boards or something, and maybe one of the staff would like to meet some athlete or somebody who's interesting in your community. So maybe see if you can make those contacts for them. And the fourth thing on here is to have somebody in the organization, whether it's HR or the ED or somebody, acknowledge milestones in these people's lives, like birthdays or anniversaries, or the anniversary of their getting a job here. But we need to make sure that the staff is feeling seen so that they know how to help other people feel. Now I'm going to share 4 things that I think we can ask of staff. One thing is we could ask if they'd be willing to make calls to tell donors how grateful they are, because I think if a donor got a call from a program staff and the person said, oh, now I'll be able to take the kids on this field trip because of your gift, that's going to go a really long way. I think donors would really love that. And it doesn't feel scary like fundraising does. Ask if they'd be willing to write notes on thank you cards. Maybe the cards are already pre-printed and they just jot a little note on the side and then name their position so people understand who they are. Ask them if they'd be willing to speak with donors who come in for a tour. One of my clients just got a $10,000 gift at the end of a tour because the donor said that he'd never seen staff actually stop and engage with him as he went through an office before. And he was so impressed by how engaged they were with external stakeholders that he gave them $10,000 on the spot, which he hadn't been planning to do. And then the fourth one is ask them if they'd be willing to help work the room at gatherings where there are donors or volunteers. My church engages in something called radical hospitality. And we all got trained how to see people when they entered the room and make sure that we were watching for people who didn't feel connected and making sure that people feel greeted when they arrive. So maybe the staff could help with that whenever you've got some kind of gathering. Now I'm going to move on to things that we can do with our boards. And again, I'm going to start with things that we could do for the board before we ask them to do anything on our behalf. So one is you can see if board meetings could start with shout outs as well, so that board members who've been doing heavy lifting and doing their job get acknowledged for that. We could make sure that the staff is sending board members personal notes that capture and reflect their unique gifts, because each board member brings different things to the organization and they want to feel seen and known for the things that they offer. We might want to take pictures of them with celebrities or influencers and send them to them the next day with a photo. And one of my favorite things is to ask them for advice, not in the context of the board meeting, but outside the board meeting, and then let them know what we did with that advice. And even if you didn't take it, circle back and help them understand that you listened to them and you took all the other things into consideration, and maybe their idea wasn't the best one, but you did hear them. And then the last thing is to ask them for a testimonial about why they serve, and then start including that in club communication. Because I've found that people haven't necessarily articulated what it is that they love about the organization or why they've decided to help be a board member there. And asking them to write that down and say it out loud can be really powerful. Now here are some things that we can ask the board to do to help us make people feel seen or known or appreciated. The first thing, we know that from Penelope Burk's research that the single most impactful thing that a board member can do to generate revenue for an organization is call somebody who just made a gift and thank them for that gift. And if your board members are paralyzed to do that, and I know most board members don't want to have to call donors because they think they might ask them a question they don't know the answer to, or they don't know them or something, I just suggest that they call them when they don't think they're going to be home and leave a voicemail on their answering machine. But that is the single most important thing that a board member can do to help raise money, is call a recent donor to thank them for their support. The next most impactful thing is to write a handwritten note. And in my experience, we have to actually write the script for them to put in the note, because even though these people might be corporate CEOs, it doesn't mean that they know how to write a kick-ass thank you. And so a lot of times we'll literally give the board member the 3x5 card with some suggested language and say, here, make this sound like you, but please write this note on this card. Another thing might be to jot notes on a thank you that someone else wrote. And one of the things that one of my clients did was give every board member a pad of sticky notes, colored sticky notes, and say, just take this pad home, and whenever you've got a couple minutes of downtime, write a handwritten note on here, and then bring us back the whole pad full of handwritten notes. It only has to be 5 or 6 words. And then the staff has a handwritten note from a board member that they can just slap on any thank you note that needs some personalization after that. The next thing is to ask them to work a room at gatherings so that donors and volunteers feel seen by leaders. One of my students at the university had a great event last year where it was a donor appreciation event, and the board members had been asked to work the room there every year for years in a row, but they'd been really uncomfortable and awkward about it. And so what Jeff decided to do was ask each one, he assigned each one of them 5 donors and gave them a little bio on each of those donors and a picture of them so that they knew what to look for. And he said, your job is to have a private conversation with each of these 5 donors over the course of the evening, and have it be long enough that you can write a note to them at the end of the evening and mention something that they talked about. And the board members were thrilled because they'd been given such clear clarification of expectations about that they knew exactly how to do it, and they were really pleased with themselves at the end of the evening. So you might want to give them that kind of specificity about exactly who they're supposed to talk to, what are they supposed to say, how do they write a note at the end of the evening. And then the last thing on this list is to ask board members to send annual reports to donors and put one of those little sticky flags on it that says your name here if donors' names are listed in the annual report, so that the donor who gets this thing in the mail, the first thing they see is this little flag that says, we wanted you to see where your name showed up in our annual report. The success in here is due to your support. And that's a pretty benign thing to ask a board member to do. Now we're going to talk about what we can ask volunteers to do on our behalf. So the first thing is to make sure that volunteers feel seen and appreciated for the gifts that they're bringing. I was working with an organization that relied on volunteers to deliver all of their content, all of their program, and the volunteers had to do a lot of heavy lifting over the course of years sometimes to make their mission come true. And so one time I was doing a statewide meeting of all of these volunteers, and I said to the organization that had these volunteers, what are you guys doing to appreciate your volunteers? And they said things like, well, we're giving them a mug with our logo on it, full of candy, and we're giving them a certificate of appreciation. And I said, those things are boring, and they've got plenty of them already. What can you do differently? And one woman said, I find a poem that I think is germane to each of the volunteers that we're honoring. And I read that poem out loud in front of everyone at the volunteer appreciation event, and then I hand that volunteer a framed copy of that poem and explain to everybody why I think it reflected who she is in the world. And those volunteers felt really honored because someone had gone out of their way to make them feel special and unique, and I think we need to do that more. So make sure that our volunteers are feeling acknowledged for their unique gifts. We can also ask volunteers to help make cards or take photographs or capture stories of people who've been served or welcome others in our organization. I find that there are lots of people who love to do scrapbooking or something, or make handmade cards. There are lots of people who like to take photos or videos. Some people might want to interview the kids or their parents or something to get stories that you could use in your fundraising stuff. And the third thing on this slide is about an organization that I worked with where they had activists who'd done volunteer work with them who were not yet donors. And we were trying to figure out how to turn the volunteers into donors. And so we asked them to call brand new donors to thank them for their gift and then ask how they'd like to be engaged in the organization. And what happened, those volunteers loved doing that. And in the process, they all turned into donors themselves because of the conversations that they were having with other people who had just joined. So we can ask volunteers to engage recent donors or recent volunteers, other volunteers, and turn them into stakeholders. So now I'm going to ask you a question. What have you done in your own organization to make people feel appreciated? Because I know that many of you listening are already really good at this, and I'd love to have you share with your colleagues what you've done to help anyone, board, staff, volunteers, donors, feel appreciated. So I'm going to give you a second to write in the, Heather, do they write in the chat box or the question box?
The question box.
All right. So take a second and tell us what you've done to help people feel appreciated. Here's some great answers. I paid for a staff pool party, but just staff, so that they could enjoy a day just by themselves. Our club members make birthday cards for our board members. Oh, that's great. I'll show you some really good examples of that in just a minute. We had our kids at the club make thank you calls to our donors. Love that. We gave out great bucks to staff to spend at our end of the year party. We gave certificates of appreciation and we send out handwritten thank you notes. Great. We made handmade Valentine's Day cards for our top donors. We personalized emails to all the administrators on the administrative professional day. We've sent artwork that the kids have specifically made for donors. We've had club members create thank you cards that are sent to the donors with a formal thank you. And we've taken donors to lunch to show appreciation. These are great. Thanks for sharing those. The next question is, what have, oops. Heather, my slides aren't forwarding. Can you do the next one?
Yes, give
So
me
the next question is, what have you asked other people to do to create that culture of gratitude? So have you asked your board, your staff, your volunteers to do other things on your behalf? What did you say, Heather?
I think you have to put docket back on the dashboard before you go back to the next one.
Thank you.
Or try the arrow keys. That may work too.
Mm-hmm. Nope, that's not going. So, but anyway, the next question was, what have you asked other people to do to help create a culture of gratitude? So Heather, if we're getting responses to that, I can't see them. Oh, here we go. Can everybody see these or just me?
Everyone should be able to see them.
Oh, good. So there's some really good answers here. So none of these things has to take very much time or cost very much money. It's kind of a heart shift in the organization. So if you have any questions about how you might do this, if you're having struggles or barriers or concerns about how you can do this, you can either ask it now or ask at the end. So anybody have any ideas about how you could apply this at your own organization? I think I'm going to move on to the next topic. So if the first thing was about donors longing to feel seen or known or appreciated or valued, the second thing that they want to know is whether their gift is actually making a difference. So let's talk about that. People can't tell if their money is actually just going into a black hole. They can't tell if they're actually moving the dial. Our communication seems to be about our programs and our activities and the organization and sweeping generalities about how we're meeting the needs of lots of kids and families. We talk about outputs, which is what we do, but not necessarily our outcomes about what difference it makes. And so here's our solution. I think we need to be drawing much more vivid images of what kinds of difference people are actually making. So remember, this webinar is about creating a culture that goes across the organization, so we're going to start with staff. So I learned at a conference that what we usually tell is a story that's way too big for people to believe. So sometimes there's just some little bitty thing that actually happens every day that we kind of take for granted and we sort of make assumptions about, but our donors don't know those kinds of little bitty things that happen every day, and that's what we should be talking about more than big sweeping things like some kid who went to Harvard. So here's some suggestions about what we can do to help people see what a difference their gift has made. First, we're going to talk about things that we can do with the staff. For one thing, I think we need to make sure that someone is reinforcing what a difference the staff is actually making, because I think oftentimes those people don't get told about the powerful things that they're doing. I remember one time I had a client who was a Boys and Girls Club, and I was writing a direct mail appeal for them. And I said something about that if kids came to the Boys and Girls Club, they wouldn't join gangs. And the executive director fell out laughing, and she said, Susan, we can't promise that. That's way too big. And there are too many factors that we don't have any control over in the kid's life. So we can't promise that. And I said, then what can we promise them, the donors, if they give us money? And she said, we see the little boy over in the corner. He's a pretty violent little kid. But if we can engage him here for an hour and a half after school every day, we can keep him from acting on his violent tendencies. And she said, and see that little girl over there in the other corner? She's a not very pleasant kid to be around. She usually doesn't smell good, and she usually acts out badly, and nobody really wants to be with her. But if one of our staff can engage with her and make sure she feels nurtured and attended to and engaged in some worthwhile activity, we call that success. If she can spend the afternoon having a smile, having an arm around her, we think that's success. So I think sometimes we don't actually reflect that back to the staff about what are the measurable objectives that they're actually accomplishing on a daily basis. And then once we do that, we can start asking them to collect stories that we could share with our donors. And I know that that's one of the hardest things in development, is to get stories out of the staff. But one of my colleagues said that what she did was walk around and stop by people and say, so what happened today that made you glad you have this job? What happened today that made you feel like you actually did something for a kid that was notable? And if we stop them in the middle of their day and ask that question, they're going to be more likely to come up with stories that we can actually use. So I'm going to show you some examples that we gave. It sounded like some of you already do this already, but I love some of these postcards that we created at a Boys and Girls Club to show donors what difference they were making. So this first one was around New Year's, and they asked the kids to write down what their New Year's resolutions were, so that and that was one side of the postcard, and on the other side we had a little bit of typed copy, and that went out to our donors. But we needed the staff to help us collect those quotes from those kids. I love some of those. I think they're so cute. The next one was another one where we had the kid do the art on one side and then write a thank you note on the back. These were pre-printed, but donors felt like the kid had actually touched it. They knew it was printed, but it felt good. Here's another one where the kid did the art on the front. I love the little picture of her with that head thing on. And here's another one. This girl had won an award for digital art and got to go to Atlanta, where there was a conference of all the kids who had won digital art contests. And I said, you guys, why don't we have her send a postcard from Atlanta? And we couldn't actually do that, but we kind of created this to show the connection between what donors were giving money for and what it actually did for this kid. And here's the last one. I love how authentic these feel. But we actually need the cooperation of the staff to help us gather these things. So here's another thing I want to talk about with the staff. There's a woman who does storytelling for fundraisers named Vanessa Chase. And there's a link at the end of this webinar about how to get a hold of her and get on her blog list. Or she also has a brand new book out that's called Storytelling for Nonprofits, and it's all about fundraising. But one of the things that she specializes in is helping us learn how to reach out to staff and engage them in the process of telling stories. So I would highly recommend that you sign up for her e-newsletter or her blog or read her book that just came out, but there's a link at the end. One of the other things that we need to do is help the staff realize that the stories need to be about one person at a time. I learned at a conference that I was speaking at last year that if you tell somebody that if they give a gift of $25 they can help one child, or tell them that the same gift of $25 would serve 2 children, we actually raise more money when it's about one kid, which is counterintuitive. It's kind of a better deal to serve 2 kids, but the research shows that people would rather give to one person at a time. And one of the examples that they gave at this conference was they said, you know, Syria had been in a world of hurt for a really long time, but nobody was paying attention until one baby washed up on the shore. And that story of one person whose life had been affected by what's going on in Syria, that one image was what helped people turn their attention to Syria. And so the more we can talk about one story at a time, one student or child at a time, the better off we're going to be. And the other thing I learned at another conference was that the story doesn't have to be amazing. Sometimes we think that we have to talk about some kid who used to be homeless and now went to Harvard. But what people really want to know is the little day-to-day stuff that happens routinely in our organizations. They're not there. They don't see it. And so they need to know what kinds of little epiphanies are happening, little ways that we're changing kids' minds and hearts and behavior. We also need to ask our staff to think about feelings and emotions and not just facts, because we know that the feelings and emotions raise way more money than facts or statistics. I was working with an organization that gives scholarships to students, and the students routinely said, you know, it wasn't the money that they gave me because it actually wasn't that much toward my tuition. What really marked me was that the realization that somebody had my back enough to want to give money so that I could go to school. So we need to make sure that those are the kinds of things that we're asking staff for. A couple of other things about this. We need to discuss the need to start our messages with vivid images, not generic, predictable text. So, and one of the things that I think we need to work on is starting our thank yous with some vivid images. So I went to a workshop that Penelope Burk had done when her research first came out, and everybody in the room had been raising money for 25 years or more. So it was a pretty seasoned, experienced group of professionals. And she said, I never want you to start a thank you note with the words thank you for again. In fact, I want you to practice it right now. And so she had all this room full of really seasoned professionals trying to start a thank you note that didn't start with thank you for, and we were all sort of twitching and grimacing and having a hard time. And every time we would call one out, she'd go, no, that one's lame, that sucks, that's stupid, start over. And finally she accepted one from this one guy that sounded like this. It said, we just turned on the front burner on the stove at the shelter to make soup for the women tonight, thanks to your support. So people really love the idea of the front burner on the stove, soup, tonight. It feels really urgent, it feels very specific, and the donors can picture it in their heads. And so if we are asking people to give us stories, the more vivid they can be, the better. The more emotional they can be, the better. So one of my clients is actually working with a monthly donor program right now, and I asked them if they would send a different thank you to the donors each month, and they said they won't open them. And I said, well, they won't open them if they're boring and predictable, but they will open them if it's one line that has some vivid thing that somebody did as a result of that gift. And so I think we need to be thinking about how do we do just one-liners that really capture some intense experience. And then we need to ask the staff if they'd be willing to take photos, if they'd be willing to involve the kids and their parents in the storytelling, because the process is much more powerful then. Now we're going to move to things that we could do with our board in order to help people feel like they're making a difference. So the first thing we talked about was helping people feel appreciated. Now we're talking about helping people feel like their gift of whatever, time, money, in-kind, sponsorship, is making a difference. So I think we start by making sure that the board is getting messages that connect the dots between their work and the results that they're making. I think we don't often help board members understand that their work as governors, their work as volunteers and committee members is actually making a difference. So maybe we could start board meetings by having someone, the board chair or the executive director, connect the dots between the board work and the results. We can ask board members to share stories of success with donors or volunteers. They could send postcards or flyers or make calls or send emails to donors and thank them, telling very vivid images about how their gift has made a difference. One time we asked a board member to help make centerpieces for an event that manifested the results. We put photos and quotes from kids on table tents and had the board members set those around. One time some people made cubic boxes that were the middle of the table, and they were all covered with photos and quotes from people who'd been served. We could ask board members to interview kids or parents to ask how they've been affected and share that with the rest of the board or share that with donors. At the end of this session, you're going to find some more one-page proof of impact pieces. Actually, I think we could go to them right now. They're in the handouts part of your screen. Let me see if I can go here and hit. There we go. This is really old, so don't give me any grief about how badly designed it is. It's like 25 years old. But it says at the top, when you contributed to this organization, you didn't know whose life you were touching, but here are some stories to show you what your gift looked like when it hit the street. And so we had these little tiny stories that were just a sentence or two long, followed by, thanks to donors like you, this happened. And so we gave these to the board members. It was an 8.5 by 11 that had two sides, and it was a self-mailer. And the board members just wrote a handwritten note on that, and out it went. They loved doing that. We had to give them the text to use, but they figured it out. This is another one where it was just a one-pager with some stories of clients who'd been served. Board members, again, wrote notes on the backs of these and sent these out. These will also be at the end of your handouts at the end of the webinar. And what's this last one? This is another one from a YMCA where the kids created the art and the board members wrote a note on it and sent this out to donors. And again, these are at the end of your webinar in the handouts. So let's go back to the slides. Heather, I can't figure out how to do that again. Tell me.
If you go to the bottom and click on the PowerPoint icon, the one on the right. You're welcome.
All right. So I'm asking what you have done to show board members or volunteers or donors that they have made a difference. So let's see what you guys have had experience doing. And Heather, just for a change of voice, I'm going to ask for you to read the things that people are sharing.
Okay. Let's see. Recognize them at annual meeting and in monthly board meetings. I have written thank you cards to donors and sent personal emails of thank yous to fellow board members.
Good.
We have made videos featuring the kids and parents.
So has anybody engaged other people in sharing stories of impact? So beyond you, because this whole thing is about getting other people to engage with us. Does anybody have any stories to tell about that?
Okay, we have another one. We put kids in action and at events that donors have sponsored in our monthly newsletters.
Good.
Club members have attended corporate meetings to share what the club means to them.
Good. So I hope that you can take a minute here to imagine what you could be doing in your own organization to create an environment that's focused on impact. So a culture of gratitude and a culture of impact. And then I'm going to move on to the next problem. So the third problem, the first topic was about how to create a culture of gratitude by affirming people. The second topic was about painting vivid images of people, how people have moved the dial, using emotional language about individuals being served in small ways. And now the third topic is about creating a sense of belonging or a sense of connection or community, so being connected to something that's bigger than themselves. So I think we know from research that people don't necessarily know their neighbors anymore. They don't necessarily hang out with people from work. They don't necessarily go to church. But they're looking to our organizations as a place to call their own, to find, a sense of purpose or connection. We use mass communication. We use one-size-fits-all messages when people are really longing for something authentic, an authentic experience with our mission. So here's what I think the solution is: to create a more inclusive, welcoming environment using really welcoming or warm language. And here are some suggestions. So we know from research that it really helps our fundraising to use words like the family, the BGC family, talk about tribe, talk about people being in our tent, talk about we, us, you, instead of the organization all the time. Use words like belong, connect, connection, community. And I think we need to invite these people into deeper conversations. And I know that sometimes people say, well, we can't have them engaged with the kids, but I think there's a lot that we can do without the kids around. Invite them into deeper conversations about matters of consequence, and I'll give you some more examples in a minute. But I think we should be engaging our key stakeholders, especially our donors, in surveys and in focus groups. I love doing focus groups because they cost us no money, but they get people in the room, finding out who else is like them, who else supports this work, and getting them to talk about bigger topics. And I love using disappearing task forces to engage people and use their wisdom. So we've done task forces or focus groups on things like our IT stuff, our communication strategy, our fundraising strategy, our culture. We ask them, do you read the stuff that you're getting from us, and does it speak to you, or should we change things up? So asking people to come in and participate in focus groups or task forces, participate in surveys is really good. Another way to have deeper conversations is to have salons. I love salons. We bring people in, like maybe a half dozen or a dozen people into someone's home or office conference room or something, and allow them to have a deeper conversation about something like early childhood stuff, or how poverty affects children, or going through a poverty simulation, or there's all kinds of stuff that you can have these conversations about. But Heather, we're getting some extraneous noise, so should we be muting someone? There's another construct called Jeffersonian dinners. Has anybody tried a Jeffersonian dinner? Thomas Jefferson used to very carefully construct dinner parties so that he knew exactly who was going to be there, and he set them in particular places so that he knew who was going to end up talking to whom. And then he carefully constructed the evening so that there was only one person talking at a time, because he actually very well. And at the end of the evening, he asked people what they were going to do differently as a result of that conversation. And it wasn't about asking for money. It wasn't even about asking for volunteerism. It was asking people to have a stake in this issue on the community level. And so you should look up Jeffersonian dinners. It will make your heart sing. And it's a really great way to engage donors, sponsors, key volunteers in really robust conversations about matters of consequence. Another group that I worked with had a book group on brain research on child development, and so they all read the same book, and then they got together to discuss it. And other organizations I've worked with have had private calls where maybe a dozen people got to call in and listen to the executive director or some expert talk about some nuance in the field and then ask questions about it. And so all of those are ways to invite people into deeper conversations in the organization. To be showing them who else shares their values by gathering them together and connecting them to each other. Ask them for things that they can say yes to. What do people have in abundance that they could give freely to us? Ask them to do stuff for the kids without actually being with the kids. So here are a couple examples. One of my clients was making Easter baskets for kids, and they had those plastic eggs that come apart. And so the volunteers or the donors actually put little notes to the kids inside those plastic eggs, like wishes that they had for their future, or some funny story or joke or something, or just some longing that they had for these children. And then they closed up the plastic eggs, put them in the Easter baskets, and the kids got those eggs with the notes in them. And the kids, after they'd read the notes, they wrote something back to those same donors and gave the eggs back to the donors. And so there was a sweet little loop that got created without the donors actually being in contact with the kids. Another organization that I was working with had the donors read books on tape to the kids, like little kid books, and they'd say things like, okay, turn the page now. Oh, look at that picture. So even if they couldn't be there with the kid could put this tape on and read the book by themselves as if they had another person with them. And the donors felt like they were really doing something for the kids without being present, physically present with them. I also think that we could be asking our key stakeholders to share their passion, like why, of all the organizations in the community that you could be supporting, why have you chosen this one, and why do you stay connected to us? Let me give you a couple of examples of how that could look. One time I was working with an organization where we asked everybody to make a Tibetan prayer flag. I don't know if you know what those look like, but they're like maybe 6 or 8 inch squares of colored fabric. And we gave everybody in the organization one of those, and said, why don't you make some manifestation on this piece of cloth about how you have been transformed by this organization, what you love about it, why you belong here, or whatever. And some people wrote on them in markers, some people sewed on them, some people used fabric paint, but then we sewed them all together and hung them up for display. And people loved that they could just walk around looking at these flags, and every one of them was a manifestation of someone's passion for that mission. Other organizations that I've worked with have done that same thing with quilts, or had people write on a card what they loved about the organization and hold it up and you took their picture. In fact, we did that one time a couple years ago. Do you remember the Happy song? We actually took a whole bunch of pictures of people holding up their card about what they loved about the organization and then put it into a slideshow with the Happy song as a music bed in the back. People loved it. It was on the website. We played it in gatherings and so on. I think we need to create opportunities for people to touch the organization in ways that aren't directly related to the kids, and offer them an opportunity to maybe visit with program alums who have aged out of the Boys and Girls Club but are still in our community. Maybe they were affected years ago, but it's okay for donors or volunteers to meet with them now. So now we're going to switch to things that we can do with the board. So again, a couple things that I want you to do to the board first, and then things that you could ask of them. I think we need to start by making sure that the board feels like they belong. Make sure that there are name tents at every board meeting, because I worked with a lot of organizations where people actually can't name some of the other people at the board meeting. And I like to start every board meeting with introductions where people get to share something about themselves, their favorite book, their favorite movie, their favorite ethnic restaurant, their favorite trip destination, what their first car was, what their first concert was, or something like that. And it only takes 1 minute to go around the whole table and have everybody say their name and answer that question, but it helps people feel connected to one another. And if at the break or after the board meeting, they'll stand up and go over to the person who also went to Belize and say, oh, I love Belize, when did you go? And they start feeling more connected to one another. So I think we need to make sure that the board members are feeling like they belong to something and that they feel a sense of ownership of the organization. Sometimes my clients will feature board members on their websites. Maybe there's a page about your board where there might be a photo and a bio for each board member. Sometimes we put a different story about a board member on every single page of the website so that wherever you land, there's a picture of a board member talking about why they believe in the organization and why they help lead it. And that's directly related to whatever that page is about. Here's one of my very favorites. It says, ask the board to engage in specific activities that make other people feel like they're part of the organization. This is another Boys and Girls Club example. One group that I was working with had a very huge gala auction every year. And you know how you have to swipe your credit card at the beginning of the event when you arrive? That always created a long line of people at the beginning. And so what they decided to do was have the board start bringing people glasses of wine or champagne or something, and the board actually engaged people in the line in conversation before they got to the checkout, to the place where they had to swipe their cards. And so every single donor had been greeted by at least a couple of board members by the time they got to the check-in place. So, and then later that night, every board member had been assigned to several of the major donors and been told what their bidder number was. And if the board members saw that donor win an item, they would go across the room, introduce themselves as a board member and say, I noticed you just got that trip to Mexico. That is so cool. When do you think you're going to go? And I promise that we'll spend the money that you just spent on that trip on our kids, and we'll let you know what we did. And so the donors really felt like the board was paying attention to them. I also think we need to make sure that our board members understand that they are on duty whenever we've got any kind of gathering. They are not consumers of that event. They are on duty working it and making sure that they're engaging in radical hospitality. So back to questions. I'm curious what your club has done to make people feel a sense of belonging or a sense of connection. And if you haven't done anything yet, what can you imagine doing? So answer that question in the chat box, or in the question box. And Heather, I lost my question box. Can you tell me how to get it back?
Yes, if you click on View, and then click on Questions, it should come back up for you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And Heather, why don't we just have a variety of voices here by having you read these things in the question box.
Okay. We love the idea of starting the board meeting with a different question and featuring board members on every page of the website.
By the way, that list of questions is on my website. My website is, we'll have it up at the end. But if you want a list of questions to ask at the beginning of board meetings, there's one on my website on the Boards on Fire resources page. Are there others?
We have monthly staff lunches and have invited our board members to join us for a chili cook-off this month. I was also maybe thinking of doing a pen pal type thing with kids and donors.
Oh, love it.
We ask our board members to volunteer in the clubs with the kids at least once a quarter. We also have board members write a personal note that is included in annual appeal ask for people that have connected with, that they have connections with, i.e. their gala guests.
Great. So I think we're going to move on to the last topic that I want to bring up here, and that is about how to get other people to help us do this. Let me move on. So the problem is that we can't get other people to think that it's their job to help us create a culture of philanthropy. And remember, that's one of the definitions in the UnderDeveloped report, was that everybody in the organization thinks it's their job to participate in creating a culture that is conducive to generosity and loyalty. So here's the problem. Other people don't think it's their job, and here's a few solutions. One is to offer them some really comfortable baby steps to participate in your efforts, things that they can't say no to because they are so simple. Oftentimes we ask people to do things that are way too big. Like in my experience, asking board members to call a donor is paralyzing for them. They don't know what to say to them, and they're worried about being caught off guard with a question or something, and so that's too big a thing. So maybe we need to ask board members to just forward an email or a link or write a handwritten note or something instead. So the first thing we need to ask people to do needs to be so easy and benign that they can't say no. Another thing is to show them how helping us build a culture of philanthropy actually helps achieve their goals. So we have to find out what's in it for them to participate, like is their salary being paid by the money that we raise or something like that. Make sure that if they have measurable goals that they're being evaluated on, that maybe helping us with our work is something that can help them meet their goals as an employee or a board member. And the third thing is that we need to acknowledge that change takes time and that things don't happen overnight. But we have to start taking the first steps or we're never going to get there. And I wanted to show you this slide that I saw at a conference a while ago that made my heart sing, because it shows that if we're stopping one kind of behavior and trying to start another kind, that we think we're just going to go straight to the new kind of behavior, but that doesn't happen. It actually, we have to go through what somebody called the pit of despair before people will start accepting this new behavior and embracing it. And so I think it's helpful for us to understand that when we start asking other people to help us create this culture, that they're going to resist at first because they don't know what it looks like, they don't feel good at it, they don't think it's part of their job. And so we need to work through this uncomfortable time in the middle when it's not all working well. So I hope that you love that slide as much as I do, because it shows that it doesn't go straight from left to right. So if you want to see more examples of things like those postcards or those one-pager proof of impact pieces that I showed earlier, send me an email, because I've got a whole bunch of other ones. I didn't want to include them all here today, but I have a lot of other examples. And if you come up with new examples, I love sharing stories of what real people have done to bring this kind of content to life. And so if you start doing any of these things, or if you're already doing any of these things, I would really love an email. Please send me an email at the address that's listed here. And if you want more resources, there are a lot more resources on exactly this kind of thing on my website. They're free videos, free resources. There are several videos on my Vimeo channel about donor stewardship and how we can do a better job of it. And many of the things in there are things that we can ask the board, the staff, the volunteers, and even other donors to do with us. So if you want more of those things, you can go to my website, and on the front page, on the bottom left, there's a whole list of Vimeo videos. And then on the Boards on Fire resources page, you'll find a whole bunch of other documents and other videos that might help you bring some of these concepts to life. So here's some links to the Underdeveloped report, to Penelope Burk's research and her book. And I talked about Vanessa Chase helping us figure out how to gather stories from our program staff. Those are all good links. And then we'll wrap this up by seeing if you have any other questions that I can help solve while we're on here.
Okay, Beth wanted to know, will we get a copy of the recording of this presentation? Yes, I will send a follow-up email at the conclusion that will include links to the presentation, as well as all of the attachments that were referenced during Susan's presentation today.
Thanks, Heather. Well, I welcome your input, unless there are other questions, Heather. I welcome your input about this content, or if you have questions or problems or want to share some success stories of your own, I would love to hear from you. So my contact information is on the last slide, and I would welcome hearing from you. Meanwhile, I want to thank you for the work that you do on behalf of your clubs and the kids that you serve, and I hope you got some value added out of this webinar today. And let's give a shout out to the Boys and Girls Clubs of America for actually thinking about putting on webinars that help seasoned people in development do our job better. So cheers to Heather and her colleagues at Boys and Girls Clubs of America.
And thank you, Susan, for providing this great tool for our clubs.
Are we done?
It looks like we are. Doesn't seem
okay. Thanks, everybody. And thanks, Heather. Bye-bye.
Bye.